No, let's just crack on. Right, everyone, this is the last one before the break, so if we could all take a seat. And I'll hand over to Coleman. We're getting fewer people now, so.
The panels are getting smaller.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit about ensuring compliance, looking at regulations in a bit more detail. So just to bring some sort of cohesion, when we looked at the first panel, we talked a lot about energy, the provision of power, what that looks like, what we need to do in the future, how we need to change the mindset. I thought one of the comments from the last panel from Sam when he said, basically, I quote, the time for more transparency is coming. So one of the key fundamental principles around the regulation, if we think of an umbrella of taxonomy, we're looking at do no harm, follow some fundamental principles, and then prove it. When we look at CSRD, we think about transparency. So the reason why I was asking the question from the last panel is the difference between where we were and where we're going. I see the difference is we're eliminating greenwashing, but we need to be careful that we don't get into green wishing. So lots of people have a goal, they have a vision, the North Star is over here, but they don't and haven't developed the fundamental roadmap to get there, because that will involve change. So when we think about that journey that we're making, is that the change, and I want people to think about, compliance is not what we're after. What we're after is the transition to net zero and climate neutral. And most people don't even understand what the difference is and what they are, or what that journey looks like. The most important report that people are going to have to produce for CSRD is the second report, because that's going to demonstrate and show you have made an incremental improvement. And that typically will mean something has to change. If you keep doing what you're doing, nothing's going to happen. So when we think about even the process and the steps, and we have some great experts here that are going to talk about the journey in CSRD. Most people understand it, but fundamentally there's 6 steps. So we look at stakeholder alignment. Are we getting buy-in? Do the management really buy into this? Not just lip service. Do they understand what their legal obligation is? Double materiality, starting to figure out what's different and what's changing. KPIs, what are the crucial metrics that are material to your business and the external environment? And then looking at the data collection, that brings us a little bit into science-based assurance, which I think is the game changer, because you have to get the data validated, and then you have to report. So in that context, what I'd like to do first, John, everybody knows John, I'm here to control John. So John, please introduce yourself for those people that may not know you.
So I'm John Booth, the Managing Director of Carbon Free IT Limited. We're a sustainable IT consultancy, but we do probably most of our work in the data center sector.
Thank you, John. HP?
Yeah, my name is Hans Peter, but double names are difficult to remember, so HP is what I'm called. I represent Big Core. Our core value is to be courageous. We are an energy tech company that matches electricity consumption from corporates around the world with production of renewable energy peer-to-peer. And that's why they call us the Tinder for renewable energy. We have clients from Singapore to Oslo, and if you go over to the stand by bulk, you will hear a little bit about what we do for them. We actually do proper 24/7 matching for them of their electricity consumption, as one of 2, maybe 3 companies in the world. And in this panel, what I'm focusing on point 3, data collection and the auditable tracking of the data, so that what you tell is actually what you do.
Okay, that's a good place to start then. So like we heard this morning from the first panel, there's a lot centered around energy and power, and renewable energy at the source. So 2 questions I'd have for you, HP. The first one is, it's critical that we try and figure a way to validate that when we look at the light bulb here, where these electrical ions actually came from and how we do that matching, because there is an opportunity to get that wrong. There was some suggestion that maybe we're publishing more green certs and these very nice diplomas than we're actually producing. Yep. That would be the first one. And then the second one is the mindset change between bringing the data center close in proximity to where the power is generated.
Yes, on the first, that's what I call double counting, meaning that one company claimed to use renewable energy from a certain time period, and their neighbor do the same. Like there's a double counting of the credits or the claims. And first of all, we have to have some facts on the table. Electrons don't flow through the grid. So there's no such thing as physical green electricity. The only way you can have physical green electricity is that if there's one solar panel connected to one consumption point. That's the only physical green power you can have. Point stop. The physical realities is that it is not electrons that flow along the leader. It is energy that is moved by vibrations in the electrons that is flowing through the leader. So that means that the electrons doesn't have an origin. So you cannot use the physical perspective to track electricity. You need something else. You need a book and claim system. You need a digital certificate system in order to document that there has been produced the same amount as what you consume. This is called book and claim, and that is the only way you can have an auditable system for credible single claims to renewable energy. So that's the first.
Well, let's dig a little bit into it, because we've seen a number of claims and counterclaims that people can do that matching. Mm-hmm. Right now, I think I've seen 2.5 companies that have had a go at it. Do you want to talk a little bit about who's getting there, apart from your good selves?
Yeah,
we are going to cover this in a session later on.
But we can touch it
in quite a lot of detail. Yeah. You can touch it, but don't spoil everything for the next session.
Yeah, I want to touch it because this is really about, this is really essential to your ESG reporting, because what you do is all about energy. So the energy that you consume, how that is produced, that is basically your 90% of your carbon footprint, and it's probably 75% of your sustainability footprint. So it's called 24/7 matching, or it's called granular matching, or 24/7, or hourly matching. These terminology is now floating around, and it's building up to quite a momentum. And it's driven very much by companies in your sector. Google, Microsoft, these kind of companies have had a go at it. Some have had more success than others on that. But we have to take one step back, because you need the infrastructure in place before you can start to match. You need a digital certificate or an item that you can transact in order to do the matching. So, and that's what we have sold. We have that digital infrastructure. So at the moment, there are being built protocols, and there are built infrastructure to do this matching. But scalably, it will probably take 3 to 5 years before this is global. So what you're hearing now are more pilots and tests on 24/7. But there are a couple of companies that are leading ahead. Google is one of them. They are doing it the right way. And we have also built an algorithm being able to create that credible claim.
Thank you. So, John, I'm going to set the scene now. I'm a data center operator. My world is changing. It's almost like it's the perfect storm. So we heard a little bit about technology refresh and technology lifecycle. And if I think about what's going to happen, I'm operating either a legacy data center or I'm operating a new data center. Through that lifecycle, a couple of things are going to happen. When we see the technology, the IC industry is now at 5 to 7 nanometers, basically means more heat. ASHRAE is fundamentally designed around 600 watts per chip. We're heading to 1 kilowatt per chip. So the environment is getting very challenging. And now we've come in and talked a little bit about regulation. And I know you're an expert in CSRD and Energy Efficiency Directive. We're asking these data center operators to change their environment from a reporting standpoint in an environment where they're restricted with their contracts, they're restricted with their obligations, yet they still have to report in order to improve transparency. Where do you see the key behaviors that are going to have to change? And do you think we're on the right track, or do we need to giddy up a little bit?
Well, data centers own their own estate, right? So it's their hotel, right? And when they get their customers in, they have a set of rules and kind of policies that they can apply to those customers. And if they want to change them, then they can change them, because the customer has an option. He can either stay under those new rules, or he can move. Now, we all know that moving is going to cost a fortune, right? Migration costs to go to another data center. And I'll give you an example. So one of the largest operators recently raised their temperature to 24 degrees, right? And there was a lot of angst about that, but everybody stayed. And why? Because moving to another data center would have cost them a lot of money. And there's no guarantee that that data center would not follow the lead of the largest player in the market, right? So people can change their SLAs. It's as simple as that. People need to start looking at their SLAs and change them.
Okay, so the hotel owner can decide which guest is coming in.
Yeah, well, they do anyway.
Okay, so then that brings up probably one of the most contentious points then within the data center operation. So we talked a lot about energy generation, we talked about offsetting, we talked about matching. If we look at the operational metrics and the KPIs that we have, we're very much focused on the building, and we think about the data center, we're looking at the center, looking at the gray and the white space. What about the telemetry and looking at the server and figuring out who owns, or whose scope 2 is whose scope 2?
Yeah, I thought you were going to come up with that. Thank you.
I want to give you all the easy
Yeah,
ones, John.
so there is actually a meeting going on right now, which is the Energy Efficiency Directive. There's a workshop going, and I should be on it, but I've decided to come here instead because I'll catch up a bit later.
Thank you.
Now, there was some, in the last meeting, there was some pushback from operators saying to the Commission, well, we don't have access to customer apparatus, so we can't collect their data. So, and we know that we've got the Taxonomy Climate Delegated Act, which is basically the investment side of things, which looks on the potential of stranded assets and the sustainability financing of data centers moving forward. We've also got the CSRD. So the CSRD is mostly customer-led, and they will have to report their Scope 3 emissions. And those Scope 3 emissions are going to be co-location and cloud operators. So co-location and cloud operators are going to have to provide some sort of data back to their clients. Now, we know how much energy they use, right? Because they're getting billed that every month. What we don't know is the proportion and overhead of the actual data center operations over the top of that, which is shared amongst all of the clients that are inside that facility. I have to think that there's going to be a huge increase in the purchase of advanced data center infrastructure management solutions in order to be able to provide that data to their customers. So customers and operators are going to have a very, very, very close relationship, more than what they have at the present time.
Okay, I'll ask you again. Who's going to report the utilization or the efficiency of the servers?
Well, I think that's still under discussion.
Okay, so the jury's out on that one.
Well, I mean, you know, I can tell you, looking at the report now, I remember seeing it saying operators do not want to be able to report their customers' utilization because they don't physically have access to it. So it's going to be left to the individual customer to do, but they won't be able to do that unless they have a greater reporting and collaboration relationship with the operator.
So if we turn a little bit then to probably the unique step that's in CSRD that we didn't have, in addition to double materiality, we now have independent third-party assurance. And I think that's probably the game changer because, you know, I do believe the data center community is making progress, but it definitely has a way to go because it's a bad reputation and it's a little bit shy in communicating openly what's going on. When we think about assurance, I'll come back to you first on this, John, it's about picking up that data and having somebody that's educated to interpret. Now, what they're looking for is, they're not looking to figure out whether your PUE is less than 1.4 or 1.5, but what they're actually looking for is that the methodology, in order for you to come up with that number, is solid. Not necessarily science-based targets, but that the methodology follows a standard. So when people come to audit, how are they going to audit against that standard? And maybe you could talk a bit about taxonomy in the Code of Conduct.
Okay, so in the Taxonomy Climate Delegated Act and the EU Compass, you'll see that in section 8.1 there is a section that talks about information and communication, and in there is a requirement for an operator to undertake an assessment every 3 years to the EU Code of Conduct or CLC 99-1. And what happened last May was that a lot of the auditing companies contacted DG Connect and said, how do we do this? Because the Code of Conduct is not an auditable document, and neither is CLC 99-1, 5699-1. So most of last summer, myself and a couple of colleagues, quite a few colleagues, European colleagues, including Colm and a few other people, Mark Acton, we looked through the Code of Conduct and we have made it an auditable document. And that was published in March as a supplement to the EU Code of Conduct 14th edition. It's freely available. It's quite a robust document. And I can say that last week I actually did an assessment through a data centre to the taxonomy regulations. And it's not just the best practices of the Code of Conduct, because you actually do have to look at Appendix A and B in the climate adaptation and the climate mitigation section. And it is actually quite a lot more than just the Code of Conduct, even with the delegated act part of it. So if you are needing to do it, it's just be careful about the auditors that are doing it and make sure they do it correctly.
Interesting. And HP, when you think of the challenge then of you facing a independent third-party assurance, and often the area that you're playing in is, and I think Sam touched on it, it's reasonable to make assumptions if your assumptions are reasonable. This validation exercise, and we're starting off with, I would call low-level assurance, and pretty soon it'll become a little bit regimented. So the one good thing about CSRD, which is not a data center directive, but it's a corporate sustainability reporting directive that really follows the money and follows what you're producing with that. How do you think the difficulty is going to be to convince the third-party auditor that HP and Co. are, that their data is good?
First of all, I think the idea that you can get away with the reasonable assumptions is slowly coming to an end, and that you have to prove credibly what you're claiming. I will explain this bit by a story that I experienced myself earlier this year. We have a client a global client in the building material sector, and I received an email where they were asking me for help because they had a visitor, an auditor visiting one of their factories, which has an environmental product declaration for their products, EPD. And that auditor had gone through to page 8, which was stating all the data needed to document renewable energy used at this site. And the factory manager proudly took down the diploma from the wall, nice looking diploma from the local electricity supplier with a great picture of a green field with a beautiful wind farm in the background, and provided that as a claim to renewable energy. And the auditor said, I can see your positive intention, but this is not auditable. And of course that started a lot of movements within this company, because this was about the environmental product declaration on the product that they are selling. So what do? Well, they started to document peer-to-peer the energy they used. We're talking about showing how much electricity they have consumed by the meter, matched with the electricity produced in a specific renewable power plant by the meter, and that the digital certificates called energy attribute certificates or guarantees of origin or whatever are cancelled for the purpose of that factory. This means that they can, of course, have a beautiful picture on the wall, but they can also provide an auditable matrix of data showing the time of consumption, the time of production of renewable energy, and the single claim proven by a cancellation or retirement status. And that this can be, in the end, also checked with a third-party bank function or a third-party registry that is making this kind of cancellation. This means that it doesn't look that nice, but it is much more credible, and it's 100% proof that you are having that single claim to renewable energy and that nobody else is claiming the same environmental attributes. And I think this will roll up all the sustainability matrices, because you have to prove it. You cannot just state it anymore.
Yeah, thank you. And if we think of regulation now coming in probably for the first time, that this regulation has teeth and it could bite. So when we looked at, the climate neutral data center pack, the iMasons, a lot of that was fundamentally around self-regulation or self-regulatory initiatives which we audited against. So John, can you see a fundamental difference now as we shift from regulation? And we do appreciate that was there to stave off mandatory regulation. Do you think it's a big enough change to bring in this, even though it's the beginning of a journey, that switch from self-regulation to mandatory auditable systems is going to make the difference?
Okay, I got in trouble about talking about this in Monaco, so I'm going to be quiet.
Be gentle.
Well, I'm not going to say I got in trouble. I did get in trouble. If you look at the Climate Neutral Data Centre Pact as a self-regulatory initiative, as its primary mission, it absolutely failed to meet that actual mission because regulation came in, right? And they were lobbying the Commission quite hard to go with self-regulation. It didn't happen. The Commission weren't buying it. But what it did do was that it brought together a lot of the players in the European marketplace to actually agree to a set of self-regulatory initiatives, which are now closely matched by what's happening from a regulatory point of view. So full marks for that, right? They have gone down a route of looking at they want to develop their own metrics, and I would say to them, that's a complete waste of time. The Commission will use the EN 5600 4-X series, so PUE, RUE, RUF, ERF, CUE, WE, etc. So there's no point reinventing the wheel. And, as the chair of the BSI Standards Committee, we would welcome operators to come on and talk about their experiences when these documents are pushed out. A lot of the community do have representatives from colo on operators on there. So, they talk. We talk about all of these things, so they all know about them. So why on earth they decided to go down and develop their own metric was beyond my thinking. I just can't understand it. And the same with the iMasons. There's kind of a thing of not invented here mentality within that organisation. And it really frustrates me because, people that are in this industry have gone out and spent their time voluntary to develop these standards and go through the process. And it can be sometimes really arduous. I mean, the 5605-1 is now on its fourth revision, right? And it takes time to get that out. And you're going to talk to me about that later, aren't you? We don't do this because we want to impinge on the industry and how it operates. We do this because we know what the direction of travel is. The world is on fire. We need to do something, and we're not, or for all the rhetoric from earlier that we're actually helping, we're not helping at all. We're using more energy. We're accumulating data which in 76% of it is absolutely frivolous, is not needed globally. And, I get really annoyed when people start to do their own thing when there's plenty of people that are already doing that stuff for them.
So when we think about that then, if the data is useless or meaningless or frivolous, let's switch the conversation a little bit, and I'm going to ask you, HP, when we look at ESG, we're very focused, particularly as a data center industry, on the E because of energy and water and all this stuff. What about the social aspect of it, or how we can benefit our communities and our ecosystems in which we're operating in? Where do you see that we need to pay a little bit more attention to that, taking the regulatory umbrella that's coming?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I focus on the electricity that is being fed to data centers. That's where I come in to this. So what happens within the data center, I don't know very much about. But if you are able to document credibly the source of your electricity consumption down to the hour, down to the location, so that you can show specifically, you can show the name of the power plant that you're sourcing from and the hour that you're sourcing from. Then you have a credible data point that you can start to build a sustainability matrix around. Because if you know who you buy from, meaning the power plant you buy from, when it was produced, then you can start to put claims or start to ask questions about that power plant. You know where it is, you know who owns it, and you know what you paid for that documentation. Meaning that you can actually start to ask, okay, please, dear owner of this wind farm, what do you do with the money? Do you build new wind farms? Do you take care of the local communities? Do you assure that bird migration is not being harmed by your wind farm? And so forth. So by being transparent and being able to document exactly where you buy from and when you buy, you can also include sustainability matrices and sustainability questions in your procurement.
Okay, thank you for that. And John, when you make the comment that the world is on fire, if we switch and don't talk about electricity or energy and think about water, and we look at, we're seeing now there's a kind of convergence around a 0.4 milliliter per kilowatt hour. Do you think that we're being aggressive enough in water? Should it not be zero?
Well, that will affect all of the legacy facilities that are out there and the evaporative cooling data centers, etc. So I think we have to look at it from a perspective of, if a region is under water stress, then don't use a water-based system there. Something else.
Yeah, so I'm going to challenge that. People would say London isn't under stress from a water standpoint. I would say we have big issues here. When we get flooding, we screw up the potable water. Last year we had a very good demand for water pressure hoses so that we could bring them to the roofs in Slough when we hit 40 degrees.
A couple of days after that event, I got a phone call from a Sunday Times journalist asking me for my opinion on that. And he said, 3 data centers went down. And I said, no, let's talk about the thousands that didn't.
Stayed up.
Right? So those 3 data centers went down for other reasons apart from the heat wave just exacerbated their actual problems. So they've been poorly maintained and there'd been some design failures, and that's why they've gone down. And we're working on a DNES-funded project at the moment called TICA, Transportation, Industrial Refrigeration and Cooling Project. And we visited 10 data centers up and down the country. And to be honest, all of them were really, really poor. They were leaving 40% of any potential energy savings on the table, and they were not operated correctly. There just seemed to be a fundamental disconnect between data center operation staff and their knowledge of refrigeration systems.
So I'm conscious of time. So in essence, we've seen CSRD from a switch from self-regulation to mandatory and legal requirements. It's coming down now into the boardroom and down onto the data center floor. So just before we wrap up, is there anyone got any questions for John or HP?
Come on.
Somebody?
One at the back, one there.
One there in the back.
Come back to you.
Perhaps you can hear me.
Yep.
Question to you, John, actually. So it's more of a statement, but clarification. You used a statistic about saying 76% of data is meaningless. I think we have to be careful about regulators regulating regulators. because many of those regulators, by the way, dictate, particularly in financial services, medical, etc., that data sovereignty, 10 years, etc., right? I think what you're making the point of is it's more social misuse of data versus industrial use of data, because that's my point about regulators regulating regulators.
Absolutely. So the 24% that is useful is mostly covered under the financial and other regulations. I'll give you an example. So in the presentation, I think it's actually on your website, actually, one of the events I did in 2021. I've got a picture of Sunday lunch. And I say to people, why do you take a picture of your Sunday lunch and put it on Facebook? Right? Nobody cares what you ate for Sunday lunch. And I bring it back and I say, I can't remember when I was a lad, 24, taking a Polaroid photograph of my dinner and going to the pub that evening and showing it to all my mates. Right? They would have laughed and probably beaten me with sticks and threw me out. But why do we need to do that? You know, Rabbi's done some great work, University of East London, on photographs and storage. Right? You know, if you take out your phones and look how many photographs you've got, and tell me the last time you actually looked at them.
Part of the problem is awareness, though, isn't it? Right? We're not aware. It's a cultural thing, right? So everything's at your fingertips now. You know, it's more of a memory bank than anything else. So I take pictures. I'm 50 this year. I got a green egg for myself, right? And I took a picture of the green egg because I was quite excited about it. I was trying to remember the fact that I had a green egg because my memory's so bad that I would probably forget it. Do you know what I mean?
Well, the same token, you know, that Polaroid and not taking it to I didn't take my photo albums around everywhere I went and showed them to people that probably had no interest in it.
How many pictures have you got on your phone?
On my phone?
Yeah.
I've got about 500.
500?
Yeah, but I use my phone as a record.
Are they all data centres?
They are all data centers, yeah. Or
Don't take the bait, John.
All right, we got one more question.
Thanks very much. I think the EU regulation is fantastic. It's going to really drive some change. But I wondered what you think about the UK government's reaction to this. Will they follow suit or downgrade it all, or what do you think?
So if under the taxonomy regulations, if you are a UK-based investor that has European investors and you then invest in a data centre, right? Because you've got the European investors, you need to report under taxonomy regulations to them. So that would apply, and that would mean that a UK data centre would need to be audited, and even though the data is going across to Europe. What the UK government is doing at the moment, they, as Derek said earlier, actually, there is a taxonomy for the UK, which is almost exactly the same as the European one. And I do think that as the result of our ticker project, we had to make some recommendations back to government on data centres. So we have made some recommendations, which include don't stray too far from any European regulations, because most of the operators in the UK will do have European investors or some sort of European involvement. They will have to report anyway. You know, the big guys, the guys that have got the international presence, they are not going to change the way that they report just for the UK, right?
Can I? So we were at an event in Birmingham a couple of weeks ago, and they had a couple of UK government people present at the event, and it was clear that the UK government does have a strategy, but it's somewhat fragmented, and they haven't yet pulled it together into a way that they're fully going to implement it. And I spoke to the lady afterwards, and I think there's quite a lot of frustration in government that they haven't pulled it together into this more cohesive implementation plan.
Yep.
But if we're going to meet our obligations that the UK government have set, then they're going to have to pull their finger out and they're going to have to do something about it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, so currently, responsibility for data centres actually sits with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which is like, why? Right?
It's all those photographs.
It might well be, yeah.
Anyway,